Maureen Mullen from the National Empowerment Center. The National Empowerment Center's mission is to carry a message of recovery, empowerment, hope, and healing to people with lived experience with mental health issues, trauma, and extreme states. We are proud to be a part of today's webinar with the Wellness Initiative Networks entitled Embracing a New Hope and Healing, Peer-Designed and Directed Crisis Response.
Hi, this is Oryx Cohen. I'm the CEO of the National Empowerment Center, and you have several wonderful presenters in this webinar, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I did want to drop you a little video message. Sorry I can't make it. I'm in Scotland with a rare opportunity to go on vacation with my family. But this webinar is very important to me. Obviously, we are a planet in need of healing. And we are connected. Each of us is a connected part of not only this planet, but the entire universe. And if I could say one thing in my brief message, it's, please in this webinar, if you're a presenter, a participant, please be an example of what we want the rest of the world to do, how we want to treat each other with grace and dignity and respect and love. And that's what we try to do at the National Empowerment Center every day. So I wish you the best. Enjoy. Like I said, these are incredible presenters. And I hope you have a wonderful connected time on this webinar. And if you're watching the archive, enjoy it over and over again. So I wish you the best, and I will see many of you when I get back to the States.
A poem from Christina K.K. Cack. Let me bring up that poem.
Thank you so much, Mo. Appreciate it.
Here we go.
Just as Oryx very much shared in his video, hope is the key part of this webinar. And I just wanted to share some words that I feel we all need to be holding on to. Hope, my ascent from madness to present state of clarity and self-acceptance was a journey and is a journey whose responsibility always resides within me. However, as I try to describe and share with others that wisdom I've acquired to aid in their work, I acknowledge one element that I do not understand or take credit for, something that is named or interpreted according to one's unique beliefs, values, luck, fate, karma, and or God's blessing. I believe that as long as a person is alive, some seeds of hope, some possibility is there waiting to be fertilized. Hope fights the fear, nurtures and the encouragement, the courage, and inspires the vision, the work required to resist giving up and accept that your goals are attainable. In deep in the recesses of our being, there are safe sanctuaries, secure hiding places for never fully lost dreams. But sometimes they are hidden so well that we can no longer reach those parts of ourselves. The help we need may just exist from those exceeded and unexpected sources. Thanks so much, Mo.
All right, now we will be hearing from Sarah Devido. Sarah has been a part of the Wildflower Alliance leadership team since before it was first funded in 2007. Currently serving as director, she also spends her time as a filmmaker, writer, and mother of two.
Thank you everyone for having me here and for joining us today. And I am going to talk just a little bit about Wildflower Alliance, harm reduction, the role of power in our healing. And I always start though with where we're coming from. And I'm not going to spend a lot on these slides, but I just want to sort of ground us in this. And this is one of my favorite slides to use, which is the reality that we live in systems that echo our trauma all the time, including our helping systems. And these are some examples of that. And I'll just speak to one of them, which is the comply or it will get worse. I find compliance and non-compliance to be really violent language. I find that it has a really deep personal impact on me. And when I say it's violent language, it is because when I was a kid, as a survivor of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, the people who hurt me the most would say, "Do what I tell you, or you're bad." And then I entered a system largely because of the harms that I experienced as a kid. And I found this system that was supposed to help me also saying, do as you're told or you're bad. And so I see those echoing messages. And another thing that I see is this encouragement to fight ourselves. So if you looked at the write-up of what I said I would talk about, I said I would touch on suicidal thoughts and voices and visions and self-injury. And what these systems are often asking us to do are to fight those parts of ourself that are rising up. So instead of exploring what in our life might need to die, we're supposed to just get rid of those suicidal thoughts as if they're meaningless. Same with the voices and visions. Instead of learning what their message might be, let's just get them out. What psychiatric drug can we give you to make them go away? And similarly, self-injury, which is something that I have a lot of experience with and that I used honestly as a way to survive. It's seen as a bad thing just to be gotten rid of instead of honoring the role it's played. And it causes this disconnect for so many of us internally that, we're fighting ourselves and trying to push something away that is not so easily pushed away. And part of what happens, and I take this actual analogy, I learned it from Peter Bullimore, but I really love it. I think of this a lot ever since I heard from him several years ago. And Peter, if you're not familiar with him, he's part of the Hearing Voices movement in Europe, and we do a lot of work with him. He's like, imagine those things that the systems are telling you to push away as if they were a child trying to get their parents' attention. And it might start like this, but if you ignore it, what happens with the average kid? Do they get quiet? No, it just gets louder and louder and louder. And of course, we also exist in a system that is not very invested in what our cultural differences are, or being culturally relevant, or being anything that doesn't privilege white westernized ways of interpreting to our experiences. And so I'm taking this also as an opportunity to plug the Black Movement Leaders Project, which is a collaboration between Dana Smith of New Life 2 in Connecticut, Chaku Mathai, who's in New York, and myself at Wildflower Alliance in Massachusetts. And you can go look at it if you're interested. The website's on the side there. But one of the things I wanted to highlight here is particularly Gogo Akaya Esima, who you can see in the bottom left corner there. She's certainly not alone in this, but she's a great example of someone who said, as the US mental health system was telling me how I'm wrong and I'm bad and I need to get rid of the voices and visions, I just got worse and worse. And then when I could reconnect with my culture, with my heritage, her life transformed. You can see a lot of that in Crazy Wise, a film. So in any case, I just wanted to sort of lay this ground because this is often what the system is asking for us. And then I'm going to speak largely from the place of Wildflower Alliance and how we're able to shift that and become something else, turn this into something else that is actually relevant to people. And I'm certainly not going to go through all these circles here, but I just wanted a visual representation of Wildflower Alliance and all the pieces that we have. And I will talk more about some of them. But we are a community, we're based in Massachusetts, but we reach internationally with a lot of our online supports and trainings. For example, we have a Discord server where people can gather. It's sort of an online community. We have 2 peer respites, and the reason you see a star on that anemone peer respite is because we are just in the process of opening this peer respite. It's the first trans and queer peer respite, and we're very, very excited about that. I actually have a number of the people who will be a part of that team outside my door because they were just finishing up a training day. So to give you a sense of who we are, these are a lot of our different parts. But more importantly, in this little time I have with you today, what I want to get at is instead of what the system has laid out for us, instead of just focusing on these things that we do, we wanted to focus on like what's underneath that, like what makes us who we are. And a lot of that is harm reduction. And a lot of people misunderstand what harm reduction is. They see it as when someone's struggling with a substance, you might get them a clean needle or something like that. And that's certainly an action of harm reduction. But harm reduction is a philosophy. It's a philosophy that actually really comes from Black and Brown and queer communities when there was the AIDS crisis. And even before that, their attempts to survive when no one else is paying attention, when no one else is really prioritizing their lives. And really, instead of these actions, what we need to focus on with harm reduction is that it means a radical acceptance that someone's doing something that you might perceive as scary, you might see it as too risky, but even so, being willing to put that aside and walk with them and support them to live a full life. And even more importantly, and this is where the power comes in, it's like letting go of the power to identify what the problem is for them. So all those supports you saw around our boot and flowers, which is our logo, that is about the all of those supports use this idea of like letting go of the power to identify what's going on for someone else, how and when and if they should work towards change or what they need to do about it, and being willing to partner with them and help them clear the path for the life that they want to live. And that shows up in so many different ways through all the work we do around much more than hearing voices, self-injury, and suicide, but I wanted to highlight these in particular because with each of these, you're going to see the very first one is the goal isn't necessarily to make it stop. And that goes back to that earlier part of like crushing the child's voice or asking us to fight ourselves. There's so often meaning and purpose in these things that we experience. And so instead of just trying to get rid of those things, which frankly is not effective for most people, it doesn't actually work with all the psych drugs, with everything, it generally doesn't work. To actually invest in supporting people, to support them to make their own meaning and take some of that power back, and being willing to look at how to support them to navigate the world without getting themselves locked up in a psychiatric facility or hurting themselves in a way that they didn't mean to, and being able to live that full life. And I know you see a lot here. I don't have a ton of time, and I'm happy if we have time for Q&A to get more deeply into these things and to offer people a copy of these slides. But that main point here is that we are creating a whole different way to look at crisis as learning opportunity and to uncover what these experiences actually mean to people and not assume our goal is to control or stop people. And some of this is really amazing because I wish that society was paying more attention, and not just to our voices, but even to some of the publications out there. So, for example, the United Nations put out something in 2017. It was Danius Pirius, actually, the special rapporteur, put out something that said we actually need to stop paying attention to chemical imbalances and pay attention to power imbalances, because so much of this is about taking our power back, and how people don't realize that even the act of giving someone a psychiatric diagnosis can mean a profound loss of power and a move away from supporting them to make meaning. Doesn't mean that all diagnoses are bad and they can't have meaning to people, but it is a loss of power for a lot of people. I know I experienced it that way. I experienced it, in fact, as a step toward giving a pass to all the people who have hurt me and not supporting me to uncover all the meaning and the reasons that I was where I was and how to move forward, how I wanted to move forward. And I'm going to give you a story. This is the last thing I'm going to say, and then I will be done with my time, that I think helps illustrate all of this. And it's the story of David. And David is somebody who I met years ago. He, at this very desk that I'm at now, he called the phone that was next to me, and I picked it up, and I didn't know him at the time. And the first thing he said to me was, "The Department of Mental Health told me to call you because you would have the answers." And I was like, uh-oh. He's like, "I don't even know what the question is. And even when you tell me what the question is, I don't know that I will have the answers that you're looking for, but I'm here to listen." And what he told me was that he had a plan to kill himself. He told me what the plan was. I didn't have to ask all those questions like, are you suicidal? Do you have a plan? Which so many of us find harmful. Or in my case, if you ask me that question, I identify you as a threat because I recognize you as assessing me for whether or not you need to take my liberty away from me. But he said those things to me. And I said, "David, whatever you want to say to me, I will never be the person who is going to call anybody on you involuntarily. I'm here to listen." And he wanted to talk. He talked to me then, he talked to me on Facebook, he talked to me in person at times, and he had a lot to say. But although I had made that promise and although I kept that promise, he would sometimes pick up on the fact that I was trying to figure out the right thing to say to get him to stop being suicidal. And he got mad at me. And he'd say, like, "You're not actually hearing me. You have not accepted what I said that I'm going to kill myself, and here's how I'm going to do it. You need to accept that." And he was right. The fact that I wasn't accepting that was getting in our way of our connection. So I had to take a step back and talk with others and kind of come back and say, like, "David, you're right. You're right that I was not fully accepting that. I was hanging on to some piece that I could control or have power to change you." And at that point, I asked him a different question. And what I asked him was like, "I hear that you're going to die and I hear how it's going to happen. And I do accept that. I wonder if there's anything you want to do before you die." And that changed our whole connection. And he said, "Yeah, actually, I'm a photographer, and the mark I want to leave on the world is my photography, and I want to help you create this show." And we went through the process of looking at pictures that would work and wouldn't work, and which pictures did he have left to take. And that actually didn't take just one day, it went over the course of a couple of weeks. And by the end of those couple of weeks, he had discovered his own reconnection with a world, his own sense of beauty again in the world, and wanting to stay here for himself. And had I continued in a power struggle of trying to get him to stop being suicidal, the space never would have been there. So the message isn't like that's the magic question now you ask everyone. It's more like, how do we stop trying to control and have power over each other so that those spaces can exist where people can find their way and we can be there to help them discover that path. Now, David did end up dying, but not of suicide. Not long after he decided he wanted to live, he ended up having a heart attack and a stroke. And that's the tragedy of life. You finally decide you want to live and it's taken away from you. But I do still share forth some of his photos just as an act of fulfilling my promise, even though it's played out differently. But I hope that story helps capture what our community is about, what harm reduction is about in this context, and some of the work that we do. So thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you. Next, we will have a video from Lauren Spiro. Lauren has spent over 30 years working in diverse mental health settings in the US, Europe, and Africa. She co-founded Emotional CPR and two nonprofit corporations, served as the first director of the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery, recently had an article published by the American Psychiatric Association, and is very excited about being on the training team for the first in-person eCPR team in Africa.
I would like to share with you the four most transformative lessons I've learned in recent years, which I will call points of light. So before I share these 4 points of light, I want to give you some brief background context. And there are two contextual points. And one is that I co-created emotional CPR, or eCPR, with Dan Fisher to teach people how to support others through emotional crisis or emotional distress. And in creating or co-creating the eCPR process, I included what I consider to be the most important lessons of my life, which I believed when we began co-creating it 17 years ago, I think it was. And I still believe are universal. So when I have been in emotional crisis or experiencing big emotions, what I most needed was people to genuinely listen to me without judgment, without trying to fix me or fix anything. When people listened, I remembered that I had power and agency. This reemergence or revitalization of feeling my power led to some making some choices about my life so that it was more aligned, closer to my dreams, values, and vision. So I've really skipped over a lot of eCPR, but the C is mostly about connecting, that listening, which I referred to, and then the having someone genuinely listen to me reminded me that I had power, I had agency. And that's the P in eCPR, empowerment. So I went from disconnection to connection to feeling my power and then feeling revitalized, like the chi, the energy, feeling more grounded in my body and my soul. And that's the brief kind of eCPR process. It has embodying eCPR for the past 17 years has impacted my life and my evolution profoundly. So the next contextual point I want to share with you is how important Pure Run Respite has been for me. And also when I was the director of the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery for 7 years, it was one of my, well, not one of my, it was my favorite thing to talk about on Capitol Hill with representatives or with their staff, because when they got it, and they wanted more information. You know, how does this save money and great outcomes, all that stuff. Anyway, so I'm very proud that I wrote an article with Peggy Swarbrick that was recently published by the American Psychiatric Association. Who knew that the APA was interested in progressive approaches? Like, who knew, really? I didn't know. So the article is about emotional crisis response, and I compared the conventional approach with the Pure Run Respite approach. And I will say that NEC website has the link for the article. So Pure Run Respites have perhaps the most significant and meaningful outcomes in the psychiatric survivor universe. I think of them as the North Star. When I say them, I mean the outcomes, what we have shown by people with lived experience who run these alternative approaches to supporting people through emotional crisis or distress in a home-like environment. To me, it's the gold standard in terms of providing emotional crisis support. Pure Run Respites model trauma embodied, healing focused approaches that are proactive, inclusive, and full of deep wisdom gained from lived experience of emotional crisis. So eCPR and Pure Run Respite processes are ingrained deeply in my life and in all 4 points of light that I want to share with you, because I think this is really the most important message that I can share at this point in time. Okay, the first point of light is about three fundamental human rights. Thomas Hubel, who's my number one teacher right now, his last name is Hubl. There's a lot of free resources on that he makes available on the, if you Google it, Google Thomas Hubel. Anyway, Thomas asserts that every human being has three fundamental rights: the right to be seen and heard for who you really are, the right to belong to a community that accepts you as you are, and the right to have the opportunity to flourish. Who doesn't want to flourish? Okay. The right to have a big, beautiful, meaningful life. So, in short, I think of these as the right to be, belong, and become. I believe these rights are essential to supporting human liberation. And I feel like, oh, well, I'll just say that Thomas, I'm taking a class right now with many hundreds of other people online, and it's in ancestral trauma healing code. Okay, so we're all tapping into our roots, our deep roots, and the trauma, the strengths, but also the entanglements of our ancestry, just to give you a little information about me and Thomas. Okay, moving right along. The second point of light is about inviting authenticity and our highest future potential. So Otto Scharmer, who has been my teacher for over 10 years, Otto Scharmer is the co-founder of the Presencing Institute at MIT, and he coined the term attentional violence. It is a form of violence that tends to be invisible, unrecognized, and pervasive in our culture. On the interpersonal level, attentional violence is to not be seen and recognized in terms of who you really are. When we are seen for our highest future possibility, which is what peer respite's all about, right? I think ECPR is probably about that too, but peer run respite, it's more, I think, clearly integrated into their approach. Anyway, when we're not seen for our highest future possibility, then we're seen, when we're seen for our highest future possibility, like what I'm capable of being, doing, becoming, then we are seen as our essential and authentic self. When our authentic self and highest future possibility is not seen, then its future potential is cut off from the evolution of the present. Okay, my ability to flourish is truncated, basically. Not being seen is a form of violence because it violates fundamental human rights. When people understand that they are not being seen for who they are and for their fullest future potential, their ability to fully be themselves and create the life they want is diminished. This means having an unwavering perspective of believing completely in the full potential of every person, which means seeing beyond the profound effects of various forms of oppression, including but not limited to sexism, racism, classism, mental health oppression, the list goes on. This is, I believe, a major reason why peer-run respites have very successful outcomes supporting people through emotional crisis and distress. They hold out that firm belief in people, believing in people, supporting people, loving people, and giving them the space to flourish, to explore. I'll talk a little more about that. Okay, so number 3, the third point of light is about coping mechanisms, our intelligence in action. This is a Thomas Hubel teaching. When I was quite young, probably between like 8 and 14 years of age, I was physically and emotionally abused by my mother. And when this abuse occurred, I completely, you see me like shutting down? It wasn't funny. I curled up deep inside myself, emotionally, energetically, spiritually. I needed to protect my vulnerable, authentic self. That is intelligence in action. And when I was 8 years old, did I realize that? I realized something. I was numb, I was contracted in order to survive. The numbness, the contraction, the flat affect continued for decades. For the past 35 years, I've been very, very intentionally working on healing that trauma, basically, that contraction, that numbness, that need to protect. So I've been doing that work, as I mentioned, for 35 years with other people. We basically take turns facilitating and listening to each other. It's lay people globally. It's a big kind of a self-help group that you'll never see advertised. But recently I've worked on it in a new way, not from an adult perspective. And I hope this doesn't sound too clinical, because this is not clinical. This is just human being listening to human being and supporting each other to flourish. So instead of doing it from the adult perspective, which I've been doing for 35 years, I tried it from the ecosystem of my young person when the abuse occurred. Okay, by ecosystem, I mean tuning into how it felt at the time, what was going on in the household, how I felt, the communication, whatever, the ecosystem means to you. It was kind of like the environment and what was around me. So tuning into my young person and then feeling the grief, it's emotional, the sadness, I felt a lot of sadness, anger. I've had a lot of feelings. And a lot of tears come out when I do this work. I mean, I told the person who was listening to me, I said, I have a pile of tissues on the floor here. But after doing the work for 30 to 40 minutes, I felt a deeper spaciousness, a relief, like a chunk of the numbness and the contraction had melted away. It was gone. And that sensation was much deeper when I did then compared to when I did it just from today, like today looking back. So I hope that makes sense. It's like really going back to where the trauma and the hurts were laid in and releasing the emotions, tuning into them and releasing them from that younger perspective was much more powerful, much more healing. And being listened to in an authentic and respectful manner allowed me to connect with my young self, release the emotions, and that process in turn allowed wisdom to flow and less need to compartmentalize and be numb. So I really felt a spaciousness. I felt like this work I was doing, the healing work, was a gift, because the hook to the trigger was no longer there. I felt grateful for the lessons that I had learned, grateful that my mother in turn was abused by her mother. This is part of my ancestral lineage, but I could appreciate it more once I explored it more deeply. So by respecting coping mechanisms, okay, the contraction, the numbness, etc., as intelligence, we can assist other people or help ourselves, as I did, in distress, if they want to do this kind of work, to gently explore together the layers of distancing or numbness or retraction. So giving the person space and support necessary to feel the emotions instead of putting so much resource into suppressing them, which I unknowingly had been doing for a long time. And I think generally there's generations in my ancestry of doing that. My mother certainly did it. And it came out in her rage and abuse. So I get it. I get it. In summary, emotional crisis is understood as a valid and meaningful coping mechanism that's protecting the person. In my sense, in my case, it's like that young one from trauma or challenging circumstances. So by using curious inquiry, we can explore our own as well as other people's experiences and perspectives and get support for thinking and feeling our way through the emotional distress. I don't know a more powerful way to take charge of my life and for other people to take charge of their lives. Of course, there's many different pathways for people, but I feel so grateful that I'm discovering this path. I have other paths too, but this one's been like a gold mine. And it's embedded in peer run respite and emotional CPR. So, in all honesty, this journey for me, and I think for others, means venturing into unknown territory and tolerating uncertainty. When a person feels supported, they find meaning in big emotions. They regain emotional balance. I certainly have. Reclaim power, determine the next steps or their future path. It has worked for me big time, and it has helped me feel that my life has a lot of purpose, and it's very fulfilling. Okay, number 4. The fourth point of light is about being with and inviting authenticity and attunement. So by being with, I mean being aware of the impact of my words and my actions, and to communicate in ways that are authentically validating, inviting openness with regard to reflecting on inner experiences, and allowing people to move through their distress, whatever they're feeling. So being with includes practicing attunement. And by that, I mean a feeling of spaciousness and presence, where we're I shouldn't say where we're on the same wavelength. And sometimes it's like, I feel you feeling me, or I feel you feeling me, feeling you. Okay, so it's that level of like, I'm really being with you. And that deepens our ability to be aware of each other's feelings, respecting the emotions, and supporting the person to feel cared for and listened to. So practicing attunement enhances my capacity to be sensitive and effective in interacting, communicating, and connecting with people. So the invitation is to let go of any feelings or thoughts that interfere with being present with ourselves and with other people. So we may co-create a safe space that invites deeper mutual learning. The safety of the space we co-create provides an opportunity to explore our emotions and thus to digest and integrate our experience. I have found that this practice opens a creative pathway, like a huge pathway to explore everything. It's opened my mind, my heart, my soul up in ways I'm sure I haven't even discovered yet. I think there's more, but it's helping me feel like my life has deeper meaning and purpose. So finally, I and others have found that as we deepen our practice of attunement, we tap into inner resources like soil. Thomas Hubel talks about, that we take a walk in nature, and sometimes we think of nature as being over there, like not us, but outside of us. And he says, no, 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 we are nature. So that helps me understand the concept of creating or getting grounded in my soil. I am nature. Anyway, so this attunement, the deeper I go into it, the deeper I'm able to go into the soil and find calmness and feeling connected. And this practice has led me to feeling more grounded in my body. And it helps me. It's helped me enhance or deepen my relationships with other people and with myself. So I will end with two thoughts for you. One is the authentic quality of our relationships is critical to co-creating transformative, mutually respectful spaces. And the second thought is that you and I, each of us, we all have an opportunity to change the architecture of our life. And that concludes my 4 points for today. You can find me at laurenspiro.com or Mad in America blog site. Thank you.
Now hear from Dan Fisher, former CEO of National Empowerment Center and now current board member for the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery.
Thank you very much, Mo, and thank you, Lauren, and thank you, Deborah and KK. I just want to say a few words about emotional CPR, which Lauren referred to, and that is that it really saved my life, and I didn't know it at the time. I was I was 30 years old and locked in a hospital, but also locked in silence. And I was unable to speak for about 5 weeks. It was called catatonia. And I think during that period, I had to go to the depths of my being to really find meaning and connection. And because I was feeling very disconnected from myself and from other people. And it was the people, I was in a Navy hospital, it was the less trained workers who reached me. And they didn't reach me through words first, but they reached me through feelings first. The feelings that came through were compassion and caring and hope. And they were in their voice, they were in their face, they were in their gestures. And they didn't try to fix me or explain me or diagnose me or understand, the sequence of what had happened. They just were present with me. And I carried that vision with me inside during my training to be a psychiatrist and during all the clinical work that I did, and then also during all the advocacy work that I've been doing. And then, as Lauren had mentioned, she and I and a couple of other people lived experience about 70 years ago said, well, what did we most want when we were most upset? We wanted and continue to want a human being, present, very present human being, a human being that is able to share. And unfortunately, psychiatric training, clinical training removes the person, removes the clinician from their feelings and from expressing their feelings. But it's our emotions and our feelings that are our bridge to the humanity of another person, from our humanity to their humanity. And when you're really in severe crisis, it's really, I think, an attempt to discover one's own humanity and one's own deepest feelings. And if someone comes and just asks a series of questions and, is very judgmental and trying to diagnose you, it just forces you further away from yourself and further away from the people around you. You just need somebody to be present and be with you. And I felt that by being together and doing these emotional CPR trainings, they call them trainings, we call them trainings, by being and holding back from fixing, we're able to impart to other people this paradigm shift from power over to power with or power from the person themselves. And we have, as nonviolent communication has indicated, Marshall Rosenberg, we live in a society of power over, and have for centuries. And what we're trying to do in the way of a revolution is bring the power of each person from their heart out so that each person can express themselves, as Lauren was saying so beautifully. And I feel like I wish I'd known this earlier, been able to express it earlier or more clearly, but by doing these classes, group experiences in emotional CPR, we're now also growing from how one person can help another to how we can grow a community of people helping each other. And that's actually something both my daughters have contributed to very beautifully. And my older daughter did this in Germany and Berlin, and she's now doing it in Western Massachusetts. And that is that when you practice emotional CPR and learn how to really be with another person, be with yourself, you yearn to spread this so that you're in a community of people that are experiencing and practicing emotional CPR. So you have a community that cares, a community that is strong. And I think in these perilous times, we need that strength. It's not the strength of physical strength first, but it's emotional strength first. I think that will not only get us through the difficult times, but will facilitate the kind of really fundamental change that we have not been able to do previously. So that's pretty much my story at this point. Be curious, any questions people might have, either for myself, for Sarah, for KK. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. I would now like to introduce Luke Shooting Star.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here with you and welcome. Thanks for joining us for this great adventure. Need to rewind to the beginning because we can open this space together, this beautiful, nourishing space together, which so many of these amazing presenters have contributed to. I wish there was more time because I feel you too. We're together. It's nice to be with you. Our webinar series started in 2018. Oryx Cohen, Martha Barbone, Chief Rongi, and I were part of this great beginning. 2018 was a big well-being for all. I reference that because that was part of our Placing the Keystone sequence, and that was back in December. Placing the keystone is the most delicate stage of the architectural process, by the way. It's an amazing feat that we've been able to come together and make this happen. So the way forward was in 2018, the calling was in 2019, and the rekindling was in 2020. Since then, I've been able to produce smaller portions so that people can can experience our message without having to invest so much time to watching all of these webinars and whatnot. What's to come is something of a university. It's maybe a galaxarium where people can explore these pathways and gain CEUs and training certificates and all sorts of great empowerment to bring this new way together, cultivating a well-being on Earth. So a lot has happened since then. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, reviving WIN. I think we can do this. The stone that the builder refused shall be the primary keystone. Indeed. This webinar, Embracing a New Hope, is intended to illustrate and to share the understanding of what nature's example of mycelial networks could look like for our species, for humanity, as a viable alternative to what this 988 has become. And that's what Mark Lakeman was sharing with us in The Calling in 2019. I encourage people to visit our YouTube channel, Allied Circles, and start to discover more of this message that we've been co-creating intentionally throughout these years. We have two more stops, two more portions after this for Earth Day, and then May 1st for renewal. And then the webinar series will be completed, and we'll be onward to the great new beginnings that lay beyond. So bioregional alliances, co-creating, with Wildflower Alliance and so many others. Intentional peer support, ECPR, the work that reconnects, all of these will inform this new way. So it's pre-crisis, during crisis, and post-crisis. I'm transmitting to you from a high security location. This is a facility that is it's engineered to provide supports for people after crisis. So it's a really monumental feat what we've been able to accomplish here, and I do have support from the administration here, and that is unprecedented. We've been succeeding, and what comes forward is just you wait. The motherships, the mother trees, family supports. Here we go. The peer-run respites were just the tip of the iceberg. And you were talking about that, Sarah, in your article in Mad in America. There's so much more to this ecosystem of supports than just the peer-run respites. So, yeah, the phoenix flew over the cuckoo's nest. There's a little hint about where I'm at for you, okay? My inner young person is coming out a lot too, by the way, Lauren. I hear you. I'm with you. And that inner young person is my inner female, by the way. I hope that I can help make sense for people about how there's many genders and identities. My inner female is that unicorn from The Last Unicorn, the Lady Amathea. And that unicorn is a very, very, very strong presence within me, calling forth now in these times to push back that Watiko I was talking about. So thank you. Cultivating well-being on Earth for the future of our species and love for our home.
Thank you, Luke. We will now hear from Christina Katt. KK has 24 years shattering disability barriers. Survivor, founder of Belief Factory, VP of NARPA, and President, CEO of Mind Freedom International, and a founder of multiple justice initiatives. KK proves limitations are illusions. Let me bring up KK's PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you so much, Mo. And thank you, Luke, Dan. Lauren's words were powerful. So, Sarah, you gave a wonderful presentation. And I really do hope that that everybody's kind of seeing some of these knitted pieces together, as Luke referred to. In the opening, I read a poem and I put it in the chat for everybody to have, in which there is that presence of hope. And I just want to highlight that the power of presence, the value of being bared witness to. So many of us that have been uh, in these vulnerable places and emotional spaces that we just needed to be heard, like Sarah referred to her journey. Uh, I think these different offerings, these different presentations really tie together that we are co-creating those spaces and those places and attempting to merge community because it's needed now more than ever, but also to embrace and accept the unknowns and the mysteries. So that's where that really highlighted. And that brought me to a time and a place where I came together with Ron Bassman and we discussed what it is that, was his one thing he really wanted to do over the course of his journey as an advocate and working in this field. And he said, I've always wanted to bring together survivors and families speaking together, individuals that have been there and done that, and family members that may not understand the whole process and what crisis may or may not look like because they can bring a deeper understanding. And so Safe for Recovery was born. So it's survivors and families empowered for recovery. Next slide, please, Mo. So we there was a group of individuals that came together, and many of them actually are working on the clinical side, but are very aware and have personal experiences. And so it was individuals that had that are survivors, family members, and some family members had personal experiences and journeys, along with experiencing those elevated states or altered states or with a loved one as well, and families and partners, loved ones, but also mental health professionals that believe that there's a lot of mysteries and myths about the crisis experience that we could maybe add some support, wrap around, and create, community dialogue over. Next slide. So as we started to develop this process, it was the development process. We really did have themes that kind of taught us something different. And I know from my personal journey, I also know from um, Ron's personal journey. We both shared, and I just highlight, Dan, thank you because you shared from yours as well. It just echoes. All of us had gotten to a place from trauma and from experience that we were deep within ourselves. And I think that there wasn't the medical model solution or answer. It had to come from deep within. And we don't have all the answers for that. But our experiences have taught us to really have an open mind that there's other options than just the medical and treatment, that we need to have a hope-filled recovery thinking, and that we can destroy. So we wanted to come together and fight back against some of these myths that we've been taught and told that there's really only one pathway, and remove those fears and stigmas that often uh, just really hinder the healing and wellness process, because what looks like a crisis to one may be a journey or just a need for sharing of space to another, as Sarah referred to. And so that resiliency and recovery, resiliency is real, and that recovery does happen. And it may look different for each individual, and we have to be open-minded to that. So next slide, please. Our mission was to develop and nurture strengths of families and individuals to understand the work through emotional struggles, uh, to ease and to remove some of the stigma of mental illness, which can only be helped by the healing hands of professionals. That's myth. And our vision is to reduce overall reliance on those restrictive interventions, such as hospitalization, um, and restore hope that recovery is real and resiliency occurs. Next slide, please. Like I said, it tied it all together. So I put that hope poem in there because it just speaks to the mysteries and keeping that hope alive, that there is something deeper within all of us in that human spirit that can rise up, that we don't have all the answers. The medical model doesn't have all the answers. And I think we've learned that, and I can share from personal experience, forced treatment, even ECT, they can, they are way more harmful than helpful. So we got to hold on to that hope of a community, of sharing, of supporting. Next slide, please. So what are we going to be doing? So I actually can share that I have recently launched the very first in-person community group of SAFE in my backyard in Ohio. But we will be offering, we have recently just trained several about 12 facilitators. We're going to be launching safe support groups in a total of 8 states to start off, 7 states to start off with, and an online platform of it for those that we're not rolling out. We are looking to build community and network in your local communities, such as having that person to lean on and hear you, like Sarah referred to, which is so powerful. So, what we're doing is we are putting out this offering that, this is a space that maybe we can discuss what a crisis is and maybe what it's not. Because often in families, it can look like a crisis to the family member, but to the individual that's having that experience, it may not be a crisis. And so we're trying to work past that emergency knee-jerk response of 988, which can be so harmful, and share how sharing space, being heard, uh, really trying to understand and be present with the people can really support and not hurt. And so having this offering to integrate the family's awareness that it might look different on in different individuals and in different communities, but homemade respite kits are one of the big things that I know that we're very much looking to support other communities in. But we're going to do a weekly and bi-weekly support group to provide information. Next slide, please. To ask, we're going to say, what is your family member struggling with? Is there any resources, supports that we can share, some group wisdom maybe to glean into? Um, is there different strategies or feelings? How is there other interventions, such as being present and supporting the individual in that time of crisis? Next slide, please. We're also going to be providing the community education resources of just debunking a lot of those myths that are out there, the chemical imbalances. And I know that a lot of us have really struggled with the medication element because ultimately there can be some more harm than help there. And we want to be in touch with our emotions. I'm going to put in the chat in just a moment. We did a one pager on the side effects and the debunking a lot of the antidepressant, uh, let's say, false information that has been out there. So, because we feel like it's really important that, people get this information. And so, kind of raising awareness and challenging the continued messaging that we get from pharmaceutical companies. Ask your doctor about this may support, it's just another medication, another medication. Maybe community support and being heard. We can't put a price on that, and there's no medication for that. It's that human connection, as Lauren and Dan definitely referred to. Next slide, please. So we have some core values. We're going to be honoring autonomy and dignity. We want safety for all, first and foremost, but also fostering those healthy relationships. Often it is family members that will call the emergency response, which can lead to some hurt and hindered relationships and fractures. So it's really restorative in nature, uh, authentic, culturally humble space. We're dedicated to continuous cultural literacy and learning and growing in different techniques and different uh, resources and tools to bring to the greater community to maybe connect the dots on natural resources and not just medical intervention. Next slide. So we're going to be talking, like I said before, we're going to be addressing some of those areas, such as the dangers of the police interventions that can occur and can cause even more trauma. Authentic space, having a safe space for family members to even ask questions. I think that's the part that's so shocking. We just don't ask. We were kind of just expected to believe whatever a doctor or a clinician tells us. Uh, the medication is going to be the answer, and oftentimes we don't feel that recovery that we know we so deserve and need in our lives from that. So, even just opening the up the dialogue of inquiring, is there other ways to wellness and recovery? Is there a better way to support my loved one in crisis? Um, so that's going to be one of the big things. It's also going to talk about, the helpful interventions and not the harmful engagements that can often occur, that we've even seen loss of life with the police interventions and such. So next slide, please. So we have a survey, and I'm going to put that in the chat too. I would encourage you guys to come and take it, because when we set out, we wanted to answer these questions. What did you, as a survivor or a family member, find helpful in any of the crisis processes or in your emotional, in your time of needing support? What did you or your family find harmful? What were the interventions that didn't work? What are you looking for that was not available? Could you not find a respite in your area? Because obviously, we all know there's a great need for more and more of those. Did you not have a community of people to reach out to with shared understanding? Because that's what we're looking to fill some of those gaps in. And how do you define a crisis? I think that is one of the highest, like one of the biggest questions, because what a crisis may look like to one may be a working through for another. It may be a part of a journey to another. And so I think that really dispelling some of the stigmas, especially with psychosis, that it's dangerous, or, all of these myths, is really important. So I'm going to put that link in the chat for you all. And next slide. Ron Bassman was the founder. Well, he had this idea many, many years ago, and it's been an honor to work with him. Next slide. A couple others of the individuals. We do have Peter Stosny, who has been just an incredible inspiration for his work, specifically within his field of psychiatry, to dispel these myths and work with survivors to launch these projects. Myself, Lisa Linderman, who is a PhD that has gathered our data. We also want to thank Mark Salazar from Temple University for gathering our data. But we also have a multitude of survivors, family members that have taken the training. Next slide, please. Taking the facilitator training. I'm going to be putting in the chat when we wrap up some of our articles that support. Next slide. And thank you. I'm going to also put the contact information for if you're interested in starting a family support group, a safer recovery group in your state, in your area, in your backyard. That would be amazing. We want to spread this as quick and as far as we can into each state, and we'll be covering virtually shortly for the states that don't have them. But NAMI's had family to family and connection groups for a very long time, and there's not been another counterbalance or another option. So let's start to spread these groups to just maybe counterbalance and provide that safe space for family members, for survivors to look at these alternative healing modalities, for these wellness options. We really do need to look at some of the natural interventions. So again, I just want to thank you on behalf of myself and the entire SAFE development team. And we're looking forward for safer recovery coming to your community in your state. Thanks so much, Mo.
Thank you so much, KK, and to all our presenters. Next, we'll have a Q&A. You can enter your questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you.
I would like to hear from anybody that has some questions. There was a question I recall when the recording will be available. I also wanted to point out that we have a video from Laura Rose Maceras from Pure Galaxy, who was initially going to be here with us to share about system mapping, which is a really important part of this, like a cellular network kind of a concept.
I see.
So
Luke, I see
she
a
has
question.
a music video. Oh, good.
I see a question.
Yeah.
The question I see is, how do we question a psychiatrist without being told we aren't facing reality? What a very good question. Well, you can you can just present as clearly and as concisely and as close to your authenticity as possible what you believe. And if a psychiatrist doesn't listen or doesn't seem to agree with you, you can then call on some allies to come in with you. Call on a friend to come in with you. And honestly, when I was working clinically as a psychiatrist, the more people that came in with somebody, the more compelling their story was. I think it is a fundamental problem is that the power imbalance between the psychiatrist and a person who's been labeled. And you can also bring resources, try to educate the psychiatrist. Various Mad in America has some very good articles and blogs. Judy Chamberlain's book On Our Own. Go to websites like Deborah's and also the Empowerment Center. See it as an opportunity to educate the psychiatrists, because honestly, most psychiatrists today really don't hear very much about recovery, and they're mostly taught to prescribe and not necessarily to listen or believe. But use it as an opportunity to educate them. I don't know if that helps Julie, who had asked that question.
Can I just, it's KK, I would like to just answer as well. Dan, you gave some great responses. I can't really add on to that, but just a little bit of how I personally challenge I actually ask, is it delusion or imagination? Uh, is it, and have somebody come with you that bears witness to, what you're experiencing. That's a huge part of this is that, sometimes it takes somebody else, just like Sarah very much referred to, and Lauren did as well. It's that partnering, that co-collaborative partnering, and bring someone with you, a supporter that will echo you. But I've found different ways in challenging and in actually having them question a little bit because very clearly, you know, um, they can write things off as diagnostics when it's part of the human experience. And maybe we've tapped into some of the mysteries. And so I like to challenge back with questions as well. I hope that maybe helps a little bit.
We have another question. Can the presenters talk about what are the barriers legislatively and financially to the setup of peer-run crisis respites?
Yeah, I'd love to say a little bit. I mean, I think that's a really huge question, honestly. So I don't know that we could fully boil it down in these few minutes we have. But I think one of the biggest issues is getting legislators to not just support the idea of some alternative, but to get them to support something that is not actually co-opted. I'm seeing a lot of legislators be willing to take a few steps in a direction, but not really grasp how important it is to not make it clinical in some way, to not co-opt it, or to not really underfund it. Often the biggest selling point with legislators is, well, oh, it saves money. But while that's usually true to some extent, often that leads to very underfunded projects and programs where it's really hard to retain the people who are doing the good work. And I think we need to push harder and use that where it works for us, but also say, like, what if it cost similar? What if it cost similar, but it was actually humane and healing and had longer term cost benefits because people weren't getting stuck in those systems? So some of those hurdles are really big, but I think then we also are really failing as a movement in some ways to develop the organizations that are really ready to take on these contracts. So I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of developing peer support and peer run organizations that really have been around long enough to have a readiness to do this work really well. And so sometimes it's this setup of saying, oh, we're finally going to give you an alternative. We haven't invested anything in you before, but now you figure it out. And if people don't figure it out, it's read as some sort of failure of the alternative rather than a failure of these systems that continue to not make space. Similarly, the other barrier that happens, or one of many, is when we just drop a peer respite in somewhere and say, okay, now this 3-bedroom house is your alternative. And if you can't make that work and demonstrate how great it is with this really under-resourced one single project or program, then we're going to identify that as a failure as well. So there's a lot of hurdles there. And I could kind of keep going, and I will put my email in the chat if anyone wants to continue to have this conversation. There's a whole national movements, peer respite coalition, having some of these conversations at this point.
I might just say a word about the importance of people coming together to advocate and advocate repeatedly. And I agree very much. In Massachusetts, the first peer run respite only could land where Sarah had already developed a lot of resources for consumer run organization. But even with that in place, it took us about a year and a half of repeatedly hammering away at the Department of Mental Health and educating them. And we actually took one of the assistant commissioners to an existing peer run respite up in New Hampshire. And she was a very tough lady. But when she heard the testimony of people who had been in the peer run respite and then were working in the peer run respite, she was amazed. And all the way back, she was saying, I had no idea that this was happening or this was possible. So educate your administrators, because often the money comes from the general funds of the state, from the departments of mental health.
We have a few more minutes. Are there any more questions? I guess not. Thank you everyone for attending this webinar, and thank you to our presenters. It's been a great afternoon, and I hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you.